Good morning again, everyone. This is Craig Gerlach, Superintendent of Schools. We had approximately 160 staff members that indicated that they would like to participate in this presentation. We're at about 138. In the room with me this morning is Corey Hirschbrunner, Assistant Superintendent, Director of Elementary Ed, Brian Casey, the Director of Technology, and Beth Bakanovich, our HR Director. Also online, we have Sarah O'Donnell that will be monitoring the chat questions that come through along with Brian, and they are going to take the questions and put them together to the extent that they can so we can get information out. So if you have questions, please get in the chat and ask those questions. We do also have a number of questions that were submitted earlier that Sarah has and she has compiled. We are going to do the best that we can to answer all questions as it relates to reopening schools. Obviously, this presentation is, the goal is to go over the operations as we know it today. It's also meant to mitigate many of the concerns and quietly some fears that are out there as it relates to opening schools, knowing that is all real. As you know, the board approved our plan in June. The purpose for approving the plan in June was knowing that it would take a tremendous amount of time and energy throughout the course of the summer to plan for what the opening may look like. The cabinet, the leadership team, as well as others have been working tirelessly to put this plan together so that we could implement it this fall. Last week, we disclosed where we are in the plan. And of course, likely you're all aware of that. We will begin face-to-face in the elementary school without getting into details 4 days a week, as well as blended in the afternoon. I'm just going to talk a little bit here, and then we are going to, around the table, give some information as it relates specifically to the plan operations, safety protocol, as well as all of the HR issues and personnel issues that we're dealing with. Please note that I have been attending CESA meetings with my colleagues around the state weekly. I host a meeting here at school with various administrators, as well as all of the, or many of the local leaders throughout our country, or throughout our county, of course, including the Portage County Health Department. I am in contact with Portage County Health and Human Services, whether it be Ray Shabilsky, Director, or Gary Garski, who is the Public Health Director, several times per week. You'll note that my phone is right here, and it only is here, and if I'm on it, trust me when I say I'm not texting my friends. I'm in communications right now with Portage County, for example, trying to get additional information. And this is what I do typically all day long. So if something significant comes up, I want to be able to see it at this particular point in time. Note that we are all socially distanced. We are also wearing masks. The governor's order does allow for removing of the mask, as I have right now, when you're speaking in an educational setting, and that's what this is. That would hold true for the classroom as well. While those teachers that will be in a position where you are socially distanced from students, it is appropriate when you're speaking to take your mask off. So those in the room do have their masks on, and when they're not speaking, or when they speak, they'll take those masks off. That said, these are very, very challenging decisions. We don't take these decisions lightly. The board has authorized me to decide where we begin school within the phases. And again, we've disclosed that last week. Unless something changes, that's the plan moving forward. If something changes, obviously, we're going to step back and reconsider. At this point, I firmly believe we need to get the majority of our students back into school in a safe environment. Certainly, there are students that won't be able to, and I say that for our staff as well. I firmly believe we can get the majority of our staff safely back into school. And of course, we know that there are some staff members that that's not possible, and we will be working through those. Beth will talk about that on an individual basis. We have accepted guidance from the Department of Public Instruction, the CDC, the WIAA, and I think most importantly from the Portage County Health Department, specifically the public health officer. Governor Evers has supported local control, knowing that what's happening in Portage County is very different than what's happening in Florence County, which is very different than what's happening in Dane and Milwaukee County. We also have the support of the Portage County Health Department, specifically the public health officer, which is Gary Garski. In the event either one of those change, we will be taking the guidance from either the CDC as it relates to closing schools, as well as the Portage County Health Department. We are we're in lockstep with Portage County, and I continue to commit to doing so. In the event Portage County continues to support what we're doing, we will be moving forward with this plan. If that changes, then we will step back, reevaluate, and adjust appropriately. That said, anything to add out of the blocks from anyone? If not, we're going to start jumping into questions, and what I don't want to do is just dominate a conversation here. So Corey and Beth and Brian may step in at any particular point in time to give information.
Sure. Do you want me just to maybe jump into the gradual start and what that means? Thank you. Okay. So as you know, the district decided to go to a gradual start. And the reason we decided to do that was for a variety of reasons. Number one, we wanted to slowly bring people back into the building rather than having all students back in the building right away from the start. And we know also that we're not going to be able to do our back to school nights and our visitation days and our open houses like we have in the past. So the intent is to also provide our staff additional time at the beginning of the year to get familiar with all of the new safety protocols, because we know that our staff has to be in a really good place and has to feel comfortable with all of this before they can help our students and our families to be more comfortable with this. So there's going to be a focus on SEL for staff. There's going to be a focus on SEL for students for a period of time as we reboard everybody back into the buildings. It's been a long time since we've been there, so we need to focus on our people. September 8th will be the first day of actual students walking into the school buildings. That will include 4K students, kindergarten students, 7th graders, and 10th graders. And the thought behind that is all of those students will be entering a building that they have never been in before. So we felt like it was really important for us to just allow those students to be in the building with staff. September 9th, no children will be in the buildings. That's a Wednesday. It will be an e-learning day for 7th through 12th graders. And then September 10th, we'll have 4K through 2nd grade, and then 7th through 12th, cohort B, because it's a Thursday. So students with the last names of M through Z will be in person. All other 7th through 12th graders will be e-learning. September 11th will be all elementary kids back, 4K through 6, and then 7th through 12th graders, again, cohort B, students with the last name of M through Z in person, and the rest e-learning. September 14th will be the first time that cohort A in 7th through 12th grade will be back in the building. And then our 4K through 6th graders will be there as well. September 16th will be the very first day of e-learning for elementary traditional students. Again, this gradual reopening allows for additional professional development time for staff. We have a total of 7 days, so an addition of 4 days this year to really focus in on not only those safety protocols, some additional PD that we know staff wants as it pertains to e-learning and to some of our learning management software, and then also time to plan, prepare, and collaborate on what the coming week's instruction will look like. I know Beth is ready to address some specific concerns and questions that have come up as it relates to staff, time off, just some COVID-related issues. So she's going to jump into a PowerPoint, and then we'll go and address the questions that staff have.
Yes, thank you, Corey.
Yep.
So there have been a number of communications that have been mailed to employees via their school email addresses throughout the course of the summer. If you have missed any of those emails, we do have them located on our district website under staff resources. It's important that you check that frequently because we will keep that website information updated as we receive new information. In terms of job safety expectations, we're doing our very best to make our buildings as safe as we possibly can. But unfortunately, given the nature of this illness and the pandemic, we cannot promise a COVID-free work environment. So it is critical that all staff understand and follow the protocols and expectations outlined not only in this presentation, but also in the employee guidelines and other communications that have been sent to you so that you can assist us in making our work environment as safe as we can. We're asking all employees to self-monitor at home and not come to work if they're ill or waiting for COVID-19 test results. Avoid close contact with others by maintaining at least 6 feet of space where possible. As you probably know by now, appropriate face masks are required for both staff and students in all district buildings, unless you're in a private workspace. If you're in a private workspace and social distancing is not possible, you would be required to wear that face mask. We have sent face shields to all employees, for all employees to every building. However, because of the governor's mandate, you would still need to wear a face mask if you're wearing that face shield at this point. Some of the information that you hear over and over again: avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with unwashed hands. Cover your mouth and nose with a tissue or the inside of your elbow when sneezing or coughing. Limit congregating. Use email, telephone, and video conferencing to limit face-to-face interactions. And wash your hands frequently throughout the day. If hand sanitizer's not, if that's not possible, utilize hand sanitizer. We are asking that students and staff use hand sanitizer stations upon entry into the buildings. In terms of employee illness, if you are ill, please stay home and report your illness to your supervisor. The supervisors will contact me if employees are experiencing the COVID-related symptoms. You can see the symptoms are listed on the slide here. I will most likely ask that you contact your physician to determine if they would recommend testing. If no test is recommended, you would remain home until you're 24 hours free of symptoms. And then we would ask that you would provide the letter from your physician indicating that a test was not recommended at this point. If you're waiting for test results, again, remain at home until you receive those results. A negative test, once you are symptom-free for 24 hours and you provide HR with a copy of the test results, you can return to work. A positive test, you will need to remain home until 10 days have passed since symptoms first started, and you have not had symptoms for 72 hours without using medication. You will most likely receive a county release that we would ask you provide to HR upon your return. Employee exposure, if you believe that you have been in close contact with someone who is tested positive, you would notify your supervisor. The supervisor will contact me and I will follow up with you. If it's close contact with somebody who has tested positive, and we do really only work off of positive tests, you will need to self-quarantine for 14 days. Even if you go for testing and you receive a negative test result, you would still have to quarantine for those 14 days because it could take time for the illness to develop. If you've had close contact with a positive case at work, you will be notified by the county health department and or myself. At that point, you could request a test. However, my understanding is you won't likely receive a test unless you are experiencing symptoms. So again, you would have to self-quarantine for 14 days, even with a negative test result. Employee pay during quarantine. This is outlined in detail on our website under the staff resources. FFCRA leave, Families First Coronavirus Response Act leave, is available. 80 hours of emergency paid sick leave, which is not deducted from your current sick leave balance, would be available for you to use if you had to quarantine or if you were ill because of COVID-19. We will make every effort to determine if you are able to telework from home during that quarantine period. Otherwise, if you exhaust FFCRA leave, you would be able to use your accrued paid time off as well. Student illness. Students that are exhibiting COVID-19 symptoms will be taken to a building isolation room. We are working on establishing 2 isolation rooms per building. The parents would be contacted to pick up the student. Corey would be contacted so that she can coordinate contact tracing as well as communication for the buildings and families. The area where the student was exhibiting the COVID-19 symptoms would be closed down for 24 hours. The class would be moved to an alternative location to continue instruction. The building custodian would be contacted so that cleaning and sanitizing can take place after the 24-hour period. It is possible that if a student in a classroom tests positive, based on contact tracing, a classroom could move to e-learning. And that's just, we're going to have to just determine that on each individual case based on contact tracing. Cleaning, we've increased air ventilation and circulation of outside air into the buildings through the HVAC systems. Daily and weekly cleaning protocols utilizing EPA registered chemicals for disinfection have been established. Special attention will be placed on disinfecting the high touch points and enhanced areas of focus on restrooms, communal spaces, front desk, and lobby areas. Again, any area where there is a possible COVID-19 positive case, the area will be closed for 24 hours, then sanitized, disinfected, and air flushed before it's reopened. In terms of building preparations, and many of you will be involved in some of these preparations upon your return to the buildings, we are marking the 6 feet of distance inside and out of the buildings, determining traffic flow in the hallways. Extra sanitizing stations have been provided in the buildings in addition to stations in the classrooms. Isolation rooms have been or will be identified for every building. Masks and thermometers have been distributed to every building. Hopefully you have your mask from the district that was sent to your home earlier this summer. You will also receive a mask that was sent to us from the DPI. And we also have 2 masks available from the DPI for each student. We've also distributed thermometers that were forwarded to us from the DPI to every building. Plexiglass has been installed in all the public-facing offices, and based on principals' request in some classrooms, dividers have also been ordered for classrooms as well. We are limiting visitors. There will be no volunteers, unfortunately, at the start of the year. Classroom preparations, much of the same. Hopefully desks will be placed 6 feet apart where possible. Students will be assigned desks where possible. Again, plexiglass has been installed in some of the classrooms, hand sanitizer in every room. There will be no sharing of supplies. Common objects are sanitized between use by students. There will be lunch in some classrooms and a limited number to the cafeteria. Music, art, and library teachers will come to the classroom. And there is a moratorium on field trips except for Boston School Forest. And unfortunately, no birthday or other treats at this time.
Can I add, only elementary students are going to the Boston School Forest this year. Late last week, we decided secondary students will not be going at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Athletics and co-curriculars. I don't know if Craig wants to speak to this, but based on the most recent information I had, our low contact, low risk sports can begin September 7th, and the moderate to high risk can begin on September 7th. Co-curriculars can begin on September 8th. Masks will be required when together in groups. And then as athletes disperse, they will not have to utilize those masks outdoors. And athletes will be expected to sanitize equipment after each use.
There were several meetings over the course of the summer with area superintendents, specifically our conference, as it relates to co-curricular activities, knowing that we schedule within at a minimum our conference, and if we don't all have the same plan, it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to schedule. That said, the WIAA backed up athletics for just to reiterate what Beth said. Low risk August 17th, and moderate to high risk after school begins on the 1st. No, actually it was the 7th, excuse me. As a conference, we took a more restrictive approach and backed all of our athletes up to after school, including the low risk. So you will see that other, what is the date today? You'll see that other schools will be continuing or will begin participation in athletics next week. We won't. We will begin after school, and we just firmly believe the most important thing that we're trying to accomplish is to get our children back in school safely. And if we can slowly bring students in, including athletes, we increase the chances of actually staying there. There was a press release from the superintendents of the Valley Conference a week or two ago indicating what our plan is. It also stated at the end that if need be, this will all be reconsidered as it relates to fall athletics.
All right.
The only other thing that I would add, we sent a communication out early in June asking for employees to contact me if they had COVID-related concerns pertaining to their health. At this point in time, I have had 24 employees contact me who either have underlying health conditions that put them at a greater risk related to COVID-19, or they have a family member in their home that has a higher risk. So we will be reaching out individually to each of those who have contacted me to let them know what the next steps are in terms of telework or leave options for them. So just wanted to update everybody as to where we were at with that. And if there's anybody that is in that situation, please reach out to me at your earliest convenience.
Do you want to start addressing
I think we should. Yep.
So we have a number of questions that were submitted live, and some submitted questions prior to the event. and Sarah is documenting those. And there's quite a few of the registrations that were received prior. So my suggestion would be that we address the people that are connected live and that have tuned in today and want those questions addressed. And we'll go in order from when they've submitted them. The first question we received, is there a criteria, for example, a certain number of cases or rates of spread that once met would necessitate changing to e-learning?
That is a question that we talk about on a regular basis. We talk about that weekly with the health department as well. The Portage County Public Health Department meets with the state county health departments on a weekly basis, and they've been asking for that guidance as well. They're hoping that they still receive some. We're all asking that questions because the county has a tremendous amount of pressure on them. They have the ability to tell me we have to shut schools down. And of course, they would like some guidance on that as well. We don't have metrics. Nobody does at this particular point in time. We're creating internally what it might look like for us to sustain our buildings or sustain our operations and our education. For example, transportation. We believe we can successfully transport students with one student per seat unless they're family members or they live within the same household. In the event that we have a bus driver get COVID, we can shuffle around drivers and routes in the event that we get two. So Tom has put together some information as it relates to what's our ability to sustain transportation, because that alone would trigger whether or not we can continue school. Same thing with food service. In the event we have staff members that get infected with COVID and we have to potentially shut down a kitchen, we can provide lunch and breakfast from another kitchen and transport it over. The question is, how many times can we do that before we no longer can provide food service? So that's some information that we're putting together. But there's so many variables that come into that. We can't say necessarily 10% of our bus drivers is the metric to shut down school, because we might have 5% of our bus drivers come down with COVID. We can't get substitute drivers. So our metric might say 10%. We might not even be able to meet that. So there's so many variables that come into play there. With buildings, it's possible that one of our classrooms will get isolated or will go into quarantine because a staff member, for example, would get COVID. We'd do our contact tracing. We talked about that. We determine what students would be and have direct contact. We'd have to quarantine for 14 days. We'd need a substitute. If that is one elementary school, Jefferson, for example, is very different than McKinley in terms of size. So in terms of percentages and numbers of classrooms, it gets a little bit difficult. It also might depend on what staff member it is as it relates to the ability to get substitutes. But that's a great question. Is it one classroom and then two classrooms and then four classrooms and then we shut down a building? And then if it's one building and it's two building, now it's three building, now a decision gets made that we're shutting down the school district. We don't have that science at this particular point in time. This is very, very new. I have the responsibility of shutting down school during inclement weather. We have some metrics. That is for weather as it relates to wind chill. It's when there's a not an advisory, but a warning. If there's a warning, we shut down school. And that's 35 below zero. And there's an argument there. If it's 34 below zero, we don't shut down school. But when it's 35, we do shut down school. That's a metric. But there's so much that comes into play. Is it 35 below zero and is it snowing out? Or is it 35 below zero and the sun's shining? So many things come into play. So we have to be careful with metrics, because there are times where shutting down school because there's a wind chill warning and the sun's shining might not make all that much sense. But it's a great question. We will be monitoring that daily. Going back, and I don't want to simplify this with a snowstorm. Trust me, this is much more challenging and much more important and serious than a snowstorm. But there are times during a snowstorm when we get information, it just doesn't happen. It looks different. I go out and drive around the community. Our transportation director, Chris, drives around, and we make decisions, because what's different in the the weather in the north side of our county versus the south can be very different. So that's going to be very different here as well. What happens in Roosevelt and who the cases are and what all of the information involved could be very different than Spash, for example. It's one of those situations, it's so new. I'll be in constant contact with Portage County and my colleagues. And when we feel it's time, and that's going to be also based on getting feedback from the community leaders that I meet with on a weekly basis, we'll shut down school when we believe it's not safe. That's the best I can give you right now. It's an outstanding question, and I hope I can have more clarification over the next few weeks that would come from the CDC, who has not given us metrics, nor has the DPI. And so we all literally, as a school district, from one community to the next, might be doing something different.
Okay, we have another question in a different direction. The biggest question I have is logistics regarding synchronous and asynchronous teaching. What does that mean? Will we be live teaching, recording in-person lessons? How will that balance with Seesaw? How will we have time to do it all? And that's elementary related. Corey, if you want to address that?
Yep, absolutely. So that's a really good question. And a lot of those logistics are yet to be determined so that we can have teacher input. But what we're envisioning is that elementary synchronous would not necessarily mean that you're in a classroom and you turn a webcam on and live stream your classroom for the entire day. That is not what it would look like. We do know that the technology department has or is in the process of, if we can find them and get them in time, a webcam for every single classroom. So what we're envisioning is sometimes a teacher may be doing a literacy lesson or a math lesson where students that are home e-learning might be able to be part of that through some video conferencing. We also envision e-learning being online activities similar to what we did last year, as well as more paper, pencil, hands-on, workbook kind of activities as well. So it will be different. We know that families and students said that it would be nice if we could integrate more synchronous into the classrooms, which I agree with. But how and when and what that looks like, we're waiting for staff to get back so that we can plan and collaborate on that together. Will we have time to do it? The intent was for the Wednesdays where we have a day off to really do that collaboration and do that planning together. I know a huge question that a lot of staff has is, will there be other meetings on those days? We do not want to plan a lot of extra meetings on those Wednesdays. We really want those Wednesdays to be devoted for time for staff to really work on their lessons and activities for next year. So we'll create those power standards together. We'll use our instructional leaders to do that work. We'll make sure all other teachers are included, and then we'll start creating those lessons together at the elementary level.
I would add one thing to that too. We've had a lot of questions about privacy, security protections, about actually having a student remotely connect to a live classroom. And I will say we're fully aware of those, and we're updating our policies, and we definitely want to create an environment where that is possible to do. Not, again, reiterating what Corey had said, we're not requiring synchronous live streaming, but there will be updated guidelines that have protections for teachers and families at home. So that's in the works. It should be developed fairly soon. Okay, we're going to move on then. Another question. Some of these were already addressed, the parameters, the metrics that we would use. I'm going to find a new one. Am I understanding this correctly? If you aren't a student to a new building, will you have your first day of school on Wednesday the 9th online?
I will answer that. If you are a 7th through 12th grader, yes. If you are an elementary student, no. Your first day would be September 10th.
Okay. At any point, can we poll students for e-learning? Also, where do you stand on bus drivers not wearing a mask when needed?
So parents right now are opting in to e-learning. We have 475 families, which equates to about 675 students that have opted into e-learning. Some of which have opted in to be flexible, meaning that they will make a decision by quarter if they're going to sign up for e-learning or not. And then we have other students who are opting in for the entire year. So if students are opting in for the entire year, we are looking to provide an online learning center resource for them. So there might be a designated staff member that would be responsible for those students that sign up for the year. So, we might at some point, everyone have to go to e-learning. It might be a classroom, it might be a school. So it's really, really important that we are in a position and we are prepared and we are able to transition in and out of that e-learning at any given point in time.
Okay. What about taking temps before getting on the bus?
Can I back up? We forgot to address the bus driver with the mask. Bus drivers are required to wear masks as well. So they will be masked when transporting students to school and home from school.
Yes. We will not be taking temps on buses. We had several conversations with our legal counsel. That gets fairly complicated as it relates to actually what our rights are, because that is considered a medical procedure. Might be a stretch on that, but there needs to be a level of expertise to do so. It also creates the question of what temperature are we utilizing, and I think that's available information. Well, it is, but we also know that all of our bodies are regulated at a different temperature. I may have a higher temperature because I have allergies, for example, and that's my normal temperature. If I have a temperature, and I always have a temperature, I then will go home and quarantine for how long and come back, but I still have a temperature. So there are all types of issues as it relates to that. There are also some concerns about disclosing that information as it relates to HIPAA.
Okay.
There's also, and again, much of this is very controversial. Taking a temperature is also controversial because there are those that are asymptomatic don't have a temperature. So it could be giving us some misleading information. I guess that's the best way of putting it. We are, however, going to encourage parents to monitor their children's health. And as a parent, if your child has a temperature and they typically don't, keep them home.
We have a question about HIPAA. How is HIPAA being followed if we have to tell our supervisor not to mention HR? Will they all be signing a confidentiality release?
So there are some different rules that apply to the questions that we can ask employees at this time due to the pandemic. The questions are very specific and related to COVID-19 symptoms. Because of the pandemic, it is expected that that information is shared so that we can do our jobs in contact tracing and trying to prevent the spread within the schools.
I have another question here. What happens when students refuse to wear masks?
If students refuse to wear masks, well, let's back up. All students are required to wear a mask unless they have a medical issue, and of course they have to have documentations. If a student is going to refuse to wear a mask because they simply they believe it's their right, they'll be asked to either leave the building and come back with a mask on, or they will be reassigned to e-learning. And we have also checked with our legal counsel on that, and we have the legal authority to do that.
Okay, another question. What if we are not able to get to our doctor within the 24-hour window for a return letter? Will that additional time waiting be deducted from federal time or our accrued time off?
So Human Resources will work with you on that. Normally, it's just a call from you into your physician or your physician's nurse for that recommendation, with the hope that they can email you a letter indicating what their recommendation is. But again, that's something that we would work with you on, and FFCRA may apply depending on what the situation is or your regular sick leave.
Okay, find another question here. Let's skip over here. Can you please try to clarify how Wednesdays will work? Will staff be at home as well as students? Will EAs be paid for this day or not?
So I can speak to staff. We are asking staff to either come into the buildings and work. And if they have childcare issues, they will be allowed to bring their school-aged children into the building, or we may allow staff to work from home on Wednesdays.
Yes, we are working with our business communities, and we're asking them to be flexible on Wednesdays for their own employees. And we have commitments from our largest three employers, Century, Skyward, as well as Delta Dental, that they will offer the flexibility to their own employees as they truly want to get their employees back to school. And they know that that's not possible unless our children are in school. Now, that said, I also understand that the majority of our staff don't work for, or our community, they don't work for those three communities. We have plenty of community members that work at Quick Trip, and they have to work at Quick Trip. I don't know what Quick Trip would do, for example, but that's just an example of a number of staff members that won't have that flexibility. So we're also working on how we can meet the needs of those families as it relates to assisting them in daycare, possibly through the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, possibly using our facility to do so if need be. And in the event, because we already know that we have staff members that are in that situation. And we're also then potentially looking at using our educational assistants to assist in that on those Wednesdays. Quite frankly, the issue of paying support staff in general, if we can pull off the models that we're moving into, there isn't been any discussion regarding laying people off. We believe on that Wednesday, there'll be enough work for everyone to do. We'll have an opportunity to meet the needs. We're also looking at shifting some hours around for the EAs that work 5 days a week. They might only be working 4 days a week, same hours, but longer hours on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, for example. So I'm not foreseeing any decline as it relates to hours for support staff. Now, that said, we also have not talked about as a school, with the school board, what happens in the event that we step into full-time virtual learning. That will look different. You'll recall last year, the crisis started in March. The school board supported my recommendation to pay all support staff because I believe, quite frankly, it was the right thing to do. We're going to have to play that out this year in terms of where all of this goes. So at this particular point in time, all support staff will be on on the payroll. That, however, could change if we go 100% e-learning, and depending on what the outlook looks like and how long that looks like. That decision hasn't been discussed with the board. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. I'm not interested in anyone losing a job. That said, depending on where we're at, we have a deficit budget. We are spending and hiring like we've never had in the past to get through this crisis. And if we have staff that for an extended period of time don't have a responsibility of work, that's going to be a strong conversation. I hope we don't get there.
We have less than 10 minutes left. There's a few online questions. And again, I would reiterate that all the questions are being collected. So we don't get a response or answer the questions today, Sarah will be working on how to best answer those. Next question, how would athletes practice after school if we are in cohort groups?
Say that again.
How would athletes practice after school if they're in cohort groups A and B at the secondary level? Students attend.
Yeah,
Tuesday, and then the other cohorts.
Yeah, we are looking at that from a transportation standpoint. Quite frankly, we're going to have to run routes to get those students that are working from home or e-learning from home on their off days. We will provide transportation.
Question specific to Maples teachers that teach in multiple classrooms in 2 buildings. If a specific class moves to full online due to exposure, what happens with all the other classes we personally came in contact with, at least in that day?
So we would be working with Portage County again to determine close contacts. It's not necessarily a given that every classroom you were in, those children would be considered a close contact. So we would have to monitor that. One other thing that's worth noting, Amanda Mayo and Molly Dembro are going to be pulling a cohort of teachers together from the Maples to see if we can put together a schedule that would minimize the number of schools and minimize the number of classrooms that Maples teachers will be in. Not making any promises, but we're trying our best to see if there's something we can do so that we can minimize those contacts with students in classrooms each day.
Will teachers be able to get substitutes?
We hope so. We're working closely with Parallel, who is continuing to be very aggressive in their recruitment of subs. So we've shared all of our protocols with them. Their substitutes will be required to wear masks. And yeah, we're hoping so.
Okay. Question specific for primary grades. What will play look like for lower grades like kindergarten? Does the district support close contact play in the classrooms?
That's a really good question, and we've had lots of discussion about that, and we'll continue to have discussion. There has to be a balance. There has to be a balance of what's developmentally appropriate for primary age students while also remaining safe. So we don't want to see classrooms where we've got students just sitting at a desk all day long and not interacting with each other. We did it during summer school, and we'll continue to find ways to do it during the school year, which we've gotten creative. There are ways to allow for that play and to allow for developmentally appropriate practices, but will they look exactly the same as they were prior to COVID? Absolutely not. So we're working through that, and we'll continue to do that and have those discussions with staff once they return back to our buildings.
Okay. What happens when a supervisor tells others about an infected teacher? What rights does the staff member have?
So that is confidential information. In terms of somebody testing positive, names should not be shared at any point in time. For contact tracing, we are going to have to rely on the individual who tested positive to share information with us in terms of who they've been in close contact with, as well as building administration and possibly the the teacher to help us determine who may have been in close contact. So in as much as we can, we keep that, the name of the individual confidential, and Portage County will also assist us with that.
What are the consequences if some staff don't follow the safety protocols?
I guess I'd want an example.
What was the question?
The consequences for staff if they refuse to follow or don't.
It would be like any other guideline or any other policy that we have. We expect all employees to follow district policy guidelines. And when they don't, we deal with them on an individual basis. We meet with, we monitor. If it continues to be a problem, quite frankly, that's insubordination.
Okay, we have a question. This will probably be the last one. Who in the school will determine if a student is exhibiting COVID symptoms? Who makes the call if a runny nose and a cough, which is many elementary students, is COVID or not? Or if a child throws up, who's the person who determines if it is COVID related or the stomach flu?
Go ahead.
So, yeah, there's a lot of symptoms, obviously, and I think they add to it on a pretty regular basis. So it is difficult to make that determination. Our nursing staff, along with our health aides, will be evaluating each situation, and you know, we're going to take it on an individual basis, and we may have to consult with Portage County. But for the most part, in summer school,
it worked. Yep. It was hard to determine at times because like you had indicated, a lot of these symptoms are normal symptoms that students have. But we contacted the families. We talked through the situation with the families. If they have multiple symptoms, we treated it more so as a COVID related incident. If it was just a runny nose, that might be allergies. You know, we didn't treat that as a COVID related issue. So it's just getting to know the students, who they are, and then having conversations with families, and then always resorting to the safest option possible.
I think we have one more question that will probably be in our time. If one student becomes positive, will that student be the only one to quarantine, or will the entire class and teachers that student came in contact with also have to quarantine?
it would be anybody who had close contact with that student. So that means they were within 6 feet of that student for 15 minutes or more. So anybody in that situation would have to quarantine for the 14 days.
Okay. I think we've just about reached our time. Rather than get into another question, and we can't.
If I may wrap up, please. I forgot to mention earlier that we did have a very successful face-to-face summer school program for 3 weeks that ended just a couple weeks ago. Now, I understand that there were only 600 students, so it was quite frankly much easier to administer, but it was a great opportunity to use that as a pilot as it relates to opening up school. I also wanted to mention earlier on that Portage County has over 70,000 residents. Our current positive rate is 341, and our active rate is 48. We have 0 deaths. I get this information on a regular basis from public health. When we talk about metrics, that obviously will be one metric that we do have that we'll be able to evaluate in the event that we see a significant increase to that. That said, I can't emphasize enough how seriously we're taking this in terms of opening up schools, getting our children back in school. And we are very cognizant of the concerns of staff, quite frankly, the fear of some staff. And we are going to continue to do everything we can to plan for something we all have very little knowledge on. I firmly believe we need to get back in school to the extent we can safely with those that can come safely. And again, the governor is saying we can do this. The county is saying we can do this. In the event they say we can't, we're going to change our course. But if we do anything different than continue to plan to get our students back in school, when our indicators from the state and the county are saying we can do that, at what particular point in time then do we make the decision to go back to school? Because right now we're relying on the state and the county. And if we don't get into school in September, and quite frankly, as I sit here, I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee anything. I'm very concerned of when that could be or when that would be, because those that are starting school virtually, I think are going to have an extremely difficult time making the decision in October, January, March, that it's now okay to go back to school. And we do run the risk of an entire year of virtual education. And quite frankly, I think for students, that would be just a crisis that will affect them for the rest of their life. Now, again, we plan on doing this. We plan on doing this to the extent that we can maintain safety protocol. That's all I have. If you have questions, please call me, email me. I'd prefer a phone call because I can't keep up with emails. I'm getting 150 a day, and the emails that I'm receiving, they require a substantial response. So if you would like to communicate, the best way to communicate with me is by calling the district office. Any other comments?
Yep.
Okay, thanks so much for those that attended. We had, I believe, over 160 attendees. We still have 153. Enjoy the week. I think the sun's coming back out.